Welcome to Hydrogen Rising, a bi-weekly podcast created and hosted by the global law firm K&L Gates. It brings you analysis of critical, cutting-edge issues impacting the global hydrogen market. We look forward to your engagement and feedback. And of course, don't hesitate to reach out if you have ideas about new topics you'd like us to cover.
Good day, everyone. My name is David Wochner, and in addition to being one of the leaders of K&L Gates' global hydrogen practice, today I get to be your host for episode 2 of our podcast series, Hydrogen Rising. I'm excited today to be joined by my colleagues, Giovanni Campi in our Brussels office and Francis Iyayi, resident in our London office. And we're going to speak briefly about the EU and the UK hydrogen initiatives, and specifically about incentives for the development of hydrogen projects. Giovanni, let me start with you. There's been significant discussion and excitement around the European Green Deal announced recently by Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, and I expect the EU hydrogen strategy just announced in July is a critical part of the Green Deal. Can you give us a quick overview of the main pillars of the EU hydrogen strategy?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, David. Yes, you're absolutely right. The hydrogen strategy is a very important pillar of the EU Green Deal. It is a roadmap laying down the European Commission's long-term vision to build a hydrogen economy for a carbon-neutral Europe, along with an ambitious investment agenda to finance that vision. In this regard, the strategy prioritizes renewable hydrogen, green hydrogen, that the Commission defines as the most compatible option with the EU's climate neutrality goal in the long term. However, it also stresses that in the short and medium term, other forms of low-carbon hydrogen, blue hydrogen, will play an important role to support the parallel and future uptake of green hydrogen. In terms of timing, the strategy is built across 3 phases. In the short term, the first phase, 2020 to 2024, the main focus is to increase green hydrogen production in the EU and decarbonize existing hydrogen production. The second phase, from 2025 to 2030, the European Commission aims for hydrogen to become a key part of the integrated energy system with the expansion of renewable hydrogen to new industrial applications like steelmaking, rail, trucks, and maritime. The third phase, long-term, 2030-2050, the Commission envisages for green hydrogen technologies to reach their maturity and to be deployed at large scale across various sectors. As regards the main pillars of the strategy, I think there are 5. The first one is a strong focus on the investment agenda, which includes also the development of European Clean Hydrogen Alliance, which is a public-private partnership focused on the deployment of hydrogen through the creation of a pipeline of hydrogen investment projects, and as well as the use of the COVID-19 recovery funding recently decided at EU level to support hydrogen projects. The second pillar is the scale-up of production and increasing demand by strengthening the EU emission trading system, which is the region's GHG cap-and-trade system, and also through the revision of the EU state aid rules for energy and environmental protection that we are expecting in the coming 2021. The third pillar is around designing an infrastructure framework and market rules, which will include use of existing natural gas transportation systems throughout the EU to transport hydrogen. The fourth pillar is the hydrogen strategy promotes very strongly research and innovation. The fifth pillar and final is a strong focus on international cooperation here with other fast-growing hydrogen markets, what the Commission calls hydrogen diplomacy. So a focus here to cross-border cooperation on R&D, for example, direct investment in hydrogen products and commodity trade.
Thanks, Giovanni. That was helpful. I understand that there are a number of funding mechanisms that the EU has in place that may cover hydrogen projects. One that was particularly interesting to me, and I think maybe of interest to our readers, would be the Innovation Fund. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, thanks, David. Yeah, it's definitely relevant. I mean, as you said, there are various funding programs out there at EU level with varying degrees of applicability to hydrogen investments. There is, for example, the Connecting Europe facility, there is the InvestEU program, and there is the Innovation Fund that you were mentioning and asking about. The Innovation Fund is important because it's one of the first EU funding instruments that is tangibly supporting the vision for a climate neutral Europe by 2050. The revenues of the Innovation Fund come from the ETS system. So it's about the auctioning of ETS allowances in the 2020-2030 period to an amount of around 450 million euros. The fund itself may amount to about 10 billion euros, depending on carbon price. An interesting aspect is that there is currently an open call for projects for the Innovation Fund, project that will be assessed on greenhouse gas emissions avoidance, on the degree of innovation, on project maturity, scalability, cost efficiency, and so on. But this to say that, some of the EU funding opportunities related to hydrogen are already live out there and ready to be grasped.
Great. Thanks, Giovanni. Appreciate that clarification. So let's jump over to the UK now. And Francis, very happy to have you here with us. Thanks for joining me on Hydrogen Rising. At the outset, I note that the UK, unlike the EU, does not currently have a national hydrogen strategy. So I guess my threshold question for you is, do you expect that the UK will implement a national strategy for hydrogen?
Hi, David. Thank you for having me on. To answer your question, unfortunately, no. There is no real national hydrogen strategy to date. However, in July 2020, the UK government unveiled its summer mini budget, and although £3 billion of funding for green projects were announced, no strategy plan was included for hydrogen. I think it's fair to say that commentators generally were underwhelmed by this, particularly in comparison to other European countries, as you've mentioned, like Germany and France. We do know that the UK government has announced further measures to support the country's coronavirus recovery, including funding for green sector infrastructure and other developments. It is still unclear, however, whether we'll see a national strategy this year. So please do stay tuned, and we're hoping that the government moves in that direction. That being said, certain parts of the UK, namely Liverpool, Manchester and Humber, are developing their own mini hydrogen strategy geared towards achieving energy decarbonisation in the north of England, often referred to as the Northern Powerhouse. Clearly, it would be more beneficial for investors if there was a national strategy in the UK to provide certainty in this area.
That's very helpful. Thanks, Francis. I appreciate that perspective on the UK. I guess the next question then that would follow would be that while there may not be a national strategy, I understand that nonetheless there are some funding mechanisms in the UK that hydrogen projects, for example, may qualify for. Could you highlight a couple of the more substantive programs, funding programs for our listeners?
Yes, David, no problem. I think on the positive note, it's fair to say that there are a few funding mechanisms that developers of hydrogen projects can consider. Interestingly, these programs have not only focused on investing in technological solutions, but also in the infrastructure that will enable the commercialization of such hydrogen projects. The government's objectives with these programs is to drive the decarbonization of heavy industries. As such, in July 2019, the government announced for the first time a 170 million funding scheme for projects focused on developing carbon capture and storage technologies and hydrogen networks in industrial clusters, again aligned with its objectives to decarbonize heavy industry. It is unclear whether these funds have been fully developed or deployed, but we do know that the government has been trying to raise a carbon capture storage infrastructure fund, which the government hopes to raise 800 million for, which is a substantial amount of money. Only a few months ago, the UK government agreed to double their commitment and make available £350 million worth of funding, including a £130 million scheme dedicated for green hydrogen projects.
That's great. And so with regard to that particular aspect, 139 million pounds for green hydrogen, how is that accessible to project developers? Or do we know, are there rules of the road so far for the industry?
We're still waiting for more clarity on the criteria projects need to meet to secure funding, but we understand that this will soon be forthcoming.
Excellent. Really appreciate that, Francis, and thanks to both you and Giovanni. It's been a really interesting discussion and highlights the critical importance of engaging with government and understanding the policy and the regulatory parameters that currently apply and probably will apply or may apply to the hydrogen industry going forward. Thank you to our listeners for joining us today for episode 2. Of course, if you have questions about the issues discussed, please don't hesitate to reach out. And of course, stay tuned for the next episode of Hydrogen Rising.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Hydrogen Rising. Be sure to subscribe to receive timely notifications of future episodes and check out our market-leading publication, The Hydrogen Handbook, on our website at www.klgates.com.